With the start of the new split, there were a lot of changes to almost every item in the game. Riot wanted to reduce snowballing, slow down the late game, and to make overall combat in the game more readable. With that direction in mind, most of the support items have gotten nerfed, but overall it's not too bad because almost every class's items got nerfed as well. Here's my tier list for patch 14.20. I'm going to go over champions in B and above. Before I do, I'd like to make an announcement that I'm starting a Patreon. I generally post tier list videos when there's big updates for supports, but now with my Patreon, I'll keep an updated tier list every patch. I'll still be making tier list videos for YouTube every now and then. I appreciate it if you check it out. Now let's jump into the B tier. Kicking off B, we have Blitzcrank. He has been struggling for a while now after he got a lot of his base stats nerfed in previous patches. He did get compensation for it in his other abilities, but I think his current biggest problem is that he is just very squishy and dies too easily. He is still one of the best counters to most range supports, and he is great for solo queue due to his ability to always be able to get a game-winning hook, but he is a bit too weak overall to be high tier. Seraphine is an interesting support because she's in between a mage and an enchanter. Her strengths lie in her early damage and CC rather than the traditional enchanter role of buffing teammates. She still builds enchanter items though, and her two core items, Helia plus Moonstone, got nerfed pretty hard in 14.19, making Seraphine a lot weaker than before. She is a pretty decent blind pick because most people will assume it's APC Sarah, and you will generally be able to fit into most comps as her kit is flexible with many different types of champions. I have most mages pretty low on the tier list because Riot purposely gutted the class for support, but I think Neeko is probably the best mage. She's more about catching people and counter-engaging than actual damage, which is why she doesn't fall too hard into the traditional mage problem of falling behind. If you play her well, she hard counters hook champs and can be good into other engaged supports. Her biggest problem is playing towards enchanters that can play safe and outscale her, but you'll always find opportunities to look for picks. She's a good blind pick because Neeko can be flexed in other roles and no one really knows how to play against her. Camille is the best melee support carry. Her high base stats and her ability to use Bloodsong very well makes her one of the best supports to skirmish and solo carry. I think the reason why she's pretty unbalanced for support is because Riot intends her to be a top laner, so it's very hard to adjust her numbers without gutting her top. Camille is great for solo queue, especially right now at the start of a split, because you can actually solo carry with her. Like all support carries, Camille can feel useless if she's behind, which is why she is in the B tier. Zilean is an enchanter that is purely about utility rather than healing or shielding his teammates. His early game is Sona level passive, but once he scales into the late game, he provides a lot for his team. He is best into dive comps where he can save his teammates and punish the enemy for committing into a fight, but is really bad into poke comps where it's hard to get a good ult. I don't think he's that great of a blind pick because he can struggle against enchanters that scale harder than him. Most people that play Zilean just one-trick him, so I'm sure you'll always find value in any team comp with all of his utility. Rakan is an interesting champion because he's that rare class of being an enchanter melee hybrid. His main thing is his lack of defensive stats, which is made up by his evasiveness and heals. Rakan feels a bit on the weaker side stat-wise, and in the current state of split, he feels terrible to play. He is very reliant on his teammates' positioning to find angles in and out, and at the start of the split, your solo queue teammates are just so bad. Rakan is definitely on the better side as a blind pick because his laning phase is very solid, and he can always reliably pick someone with R/W. Alistar is one of the most reliable engaged supports in the game. His kit design is really amazing because it's very simple, but has a lot of depth in it where you can use most of his abilities to either engage or peel. His biggest weakness is his lack of range, which makes him a bad blind pick. He can get abused pretty hard into double range bot lanes, but he does very well into most high tier engage and hook champs. I wouldn't mind bumping Alistar to A just because he is such a great champion, but I play those range supports that do abuse him, so I am a little biased putting him in B. Moving on to Sona, her core items got nerfed, so she lost a bit of power, but the meta moving towards a slower paced game kind of evened that out. A lot of people write off Sona as being bad for climbing, but if you pick her into good drafts, it's very easy to hard carry games. The biggest problem with Sona is that she is pretty useless in lane, so she can get punished very hard in a lot of matchups. As a result, she is a really terrible blind and should only really be picked into easy lanes where she can sit back and scale. Nami used to be a S tier champ, but they nerfed her core items so hard that she lost a lot of power. They did mandates so dirty by removing the bonus movement speed and only making it 50 gold cheaper. The only reason why Nami is still decent is because of the meta of mages in the bot lane. Nami is still one of the best pairings with almost all mages because of her E, but now she feels pretty mediocre with anyone else. She is still a good blind because her kit has a lot of tools to deal with different things, but she's definitely on the weaker side of enchanters. Kicking off A, we have Lulu. Lulu was buffed in 14.18 where her E had increased base damage, and it might not seem like a big buff, but that combined with Ardent being one of the few items that didn't get nerfed that hard makes her OP. If you pair her with any hyper carry, you can enable them so hard and make it hell for the enemy team to deal with. I normally rate Lulu not that high just because I don't like champions that have to rely so heavily on another person for climbing in solo queue, but Lulu is just so strong right now that I think she is easily an A tier champion. She is best in comps where there are auto-based champions. It doesn't only have to be the the AD carry, definitely a bonus if you have multiple heavy auto-based champions like Kindred in the jungle or Yone mid. Moving on to Taric and Braum, I'm grouping these two because they function very similarly. Taric and Braum are both amazing counter picks into most engage or hook champs. In the matchups that they win really hard. They are both terrible blind because they can be completely useless into double range comps. Pick them into the right draft and it will feel like an auto win. Janna's best items got nerfed in 14.19, but she is not affected as most of the enchanters with the item changes because her new build takes advantage of the cheap availability of the heal and shield changes. Her new build plays around glacial slow and heal and shield power. If you are interested, I have a video on the build setup. I think Janna is stronger than before, but she's not S tier because mages are meta. Janna is good into engage or dive comps, but with champions like Syndra and Hui all being super popular, she has a hard time navigating fights. Leona was nerfed in 14.18, which was a decent nerf because she was way overtuned before. She has everything we'd want in an engage support with her excessive amount of CC and tankiness. The only reason why I have her at the top of A and not an S is because a lot of high tier champs counter her. Like Alistar, she does lack range and she struggles against poke and disengage. Not the best champion to blind pick, but not the worst. Kicking off S, we have Poppy, who just received some nerfs in the most recent patch with her passive cooldown increasing and base damage on E decreasing. I think the nerfs weren't bad at all and she's still a great support. You can't trade as hard in lane, but her function as a champion to deny engages is still unchanged. Poppy is a great blind pick because she can be flexed top or jungle and she counters almost all engaged supports. The only bad matchup for Poppy is into enchanters or any double range lane where she can't deny any dashes. Okay, honestly, I've done so many tier lists and every season, every patch, Bard is just good. He can build whatever items so item nerfs don't affect him and he's just the GOAT. I think in this split he is really strong because there's less snowballing in the game so he doesn't get punished as hard in the laning phase. Also, immobile control mages are super meta so he has more opportunities to roam in lane since they just sit bot and wave clear and he can abuse them by catching them with his ult. I always have Thresh pretty high on my tier list when he's in a good spot because I feel like he's the champion that has the highest skill ceiling. When Thresh is played to his limits, it really does feel like he is unstoppable. This kid is amazing because all of his abilities can be used both offensively and defensively. He is probably one of the best blind picks because he has so many different tools to deal with any scenario. Pyke was nerfed in 14.17, but that really did not affect him at all. He is one of the best champions to play in solo queue due to his aggressive snowballing playstyle. You have all the tools you need to create a lead, and once you do, you can easily take over the game. He is probably the hardest champion to play mechanically, and if you fall behind, you are pretty useless. Most people that do play him one-trick him because of how difficult he is. Senna had a giant rework in 14.16 where her lethality scaling was removed, but she got increased base, heal, shield, and AP ratios. Shortly after, they nerfed her enchanter aspect of the heals and shields. Even after all the direct and item nerfs, she is still one of the best champions to play. Her cleaver build and enchanter build are both super strong, and I think a big reason why she is currently so good is because you can flex either build. She can't solo carry as hard as her lethality build, but you can get pretty close with the cleaver build. The armor shred and damage you provide is close to that of a carry. Her enchanter build also scales as hard as Sona while being 100 times more useful in the early game. Senna is usually a terrible blind, but I think she's so overtuned right now that it's fine to pick her every game. Finally, at the top, we have Rell. Her E was nerfed in 14.18 where her movement speed was decreased, but that didn't really do too much. Rell is one of the most broken engage supports because she has it all. Reliable CC is naturally takey and can buff her teammates to be able to follow up on plays. The thing that makes her better than all engage supports is her Q flash. Q Flash single-handedly can win all of her bad matchups because it's almost impossible to react to and has a lot of range. Because of this, she is a great blind pick. That's it for my tier list. Thank you so much for watching. As always, good luck climbing on the Rift, Summoners.